So I always like to start with a lesson that I learned late in graduate school that I wish I had gotten much earlier. And it's helpful to think of research questions this way before we get down to talking about questionnaires, because all questions in the world essentially boil down to this one phrase. And that phrase is differences that make a difference. It sounds funny, but you'll realize in a second here that most things boil down to this one phrase and implied the difference made. So, for example, differences in the temperature outside make a difference in how many layers of clothing we might wear, right? So differences in temperature make a difference in layers. And the difference made is our comfort level, right? So differences in temperature make a difference in the number of layers we wear, which makes a difference in our comfort level, right? And so all questions really can be parsed down to that one phrase. There are sort of two types of ways to think about this. One is research questions, and the other is hypotheses. Research questions are typically exploratory, where we don't have any prior information about the phenomenon that we're studying. For us, the people in the world who aren't astronomers, that might be how many stars are in the universe, right? We may not have any clues as to how many there are, right? On the other hand, if we're trained meteorologists or even social scientists for that matter, and we wanted to know how many more layers of clothing do people wear when it's cold outside, right? So you start with the basics, you've got underwear, and then you put layers on top of that. And so we know that there are going to be some layers, so we have some prior information about clothing, and we're applying that to a new scenario, and that is the weather. So research questions are purely exploratory, and hypotheses are sort of more guided guesses with reasonable expectations. Right? So it's helpful to think about a research question in terms of its parts, and we call this explication. And so a research question in and of itself basically starts with a construct that has various parts, and even those parts have parts. And we know a part when we see one by its indicators. And so let me put that example to work here with this concept of political ideology. So let's say we're interested in the construct of liberalism, right? We want to know how liberal is, the Northwest compared to other parts of the country, let's say. And so we can parse liberalism into several parts, but let's focus on these two. We have social liberalism and fiscal liberalism, right? And so one part of social liberalism might be the death penalty, and another part might be abortion. Well, how would we know about any one person's feelings toward the death penalty? Well, we could ask them if they support or oppose a policy that entails executing people for certain crimes, right? So that's an indicator of this part of social liberalism that we care about. And there might be some conditions under which we support the death penalty. So only if a person has committed a crime at this level would we support the death penalty. So that's another sort of facet of attitudes toward the death penalty. And there are any number of indicators of attitudes toward the death penalty. Again, on the fiscal side, there might be two parts. Taxes and sort of redistribution of wealth, and spending. And so the tax question might boil down to a couple dimensions, like who to tax, people who have jobs, let's say, or jobs of certain types, and people who make a certain amount of money. And so you can measure those two things with things that are objectively observable, like people who make X amount per year, and we should tax them X percent. Right? And so those are specific indicators that only point to tax policy, which is essentially only a part of fiscal liberalism. So you see how there's this mutual exclusivity that comes along with being a dimension or a part of another concept. Is this idea that one thing can only indicate one dimension.